I'm Andrew from Alpine Home Air Products. Today we're at the home of someone who's getting a new furnace installed. On this furnace installation, we're going to show you how we're going to make a sheet metal transition to adapt the new furnace to the existing ductwork. Why do you care? Well, you're probably installing your own furnace or air handler, and you need to get that new furnace or air handler to fit with the existing ductwork that you have. We're going to show you in this video how we're going to do it on this project, and so you can figure out similarly how you can do this part of the work yourself too. Now, we're working on a furnace today. Furnaces, we ask that you have installed by a professional licensed heating and air conditioning installer. We're working with a professional crew of installers today. So for safety and liability reasons, don't do your own venting or gas piping or high voltage electrical work unless you're experienced in this type of work. We don't want you to get hurt or have anything go wrong for you on this project. Have professionals do this part of the work for you. We'll be working with professionals today. However, you can do the sheet metal portion of the work if you're assisting an installer. We'll show you how to do that using our own Alpine Home Air Products Supply Plenum Sheet Metal Transition Kit. And it contains the sheet metal and the items needed to do this type of work, so you don't have to go find those on your own. Now, when you're working with sheet metal, please keep in mind sheet metal can be sharp. We don't want you to get cut. You might want to wear safety gloves, or at least be very cautious around the sheet metal so you don't hurt yourself. Well, let's get started on this project and show you how it's done. Let's go. Here we are in the basement. Now we have an old furnace here that we're going to be taking out. And what we have above the furnace is the supply plenum. Over on the right side here we have the return plenum. Now when this furnace comes out, the new furnace is not going to be the exact same size, meaning the height of the new furnace will be different, as well as the width will be different. So, how do you get the supply plenum, this ductwork right here, the air flows through, to hook up to the old, or rather the new furnace? Well, the way that's done is with a sheet metal transition. You take sheet metal and you fabricate it to create a transition between the new furnace and the existing ductwork. See, we're going to leave this here in place. We're going to leave this in place. So this here will be the supply plenum, which we're going to leave in place. This is the return plenum, which we're going to leave in place. And when we put that new furnace in place, we're going to need to make that transition between the two. And the way we do that is with a sheet metal transition. And that's what we're going to show you how to do here today. So if you have a furnace, whether it be standing vertically like this one, or if it's horizontal, or if it's in an attic or in a crawl space, when you put the new one in, there's going to be a transition that's going to have to be made to connect the new furnace to the existing sheet metal. And that's what we're going to show you how to do today. Here's a side view. Now that we have the old furnace out, this is the supply plenum. This is where the air goes up through. This is the return plenum. And of course the furnace is been taken out. We're going to put the new one in place. Now we're also going to be putting on an air conditioning coil on top of the new furnace, so it's going to come up even higher. So we're going to cut off some of the supply plenum here with our sheet metal shears, and then we're going to create that sheet metal transition to make the whole thing work. But this is what it looks like when it's out. We're going to start moving the new one in place. Off higher than where the top of the air conditioning coil will be, so there will be a gap between the existing plenum here and the coil. Now that I've marked that, we're going to go ahead and cut this. I've done most of the cutting with these power shears, but you can also use regular hand shears to do the same thing. Trimmed the top of the supply plenum here, the existing plenum. So it's higher up. We're going to move the furnace in shortly and the air conditioning coil on top of it, and then we'll have a gap between the top that we'll make our transition for. But what I want to do at this point is notch two of the corners, and you'll see what I mean by that, but just cut a little triangle in two of the corners here. Now it could be two opposing corners, so either these two corners or these two corners. And let's go ahead and do that now. So I'll make my notch about 3/4 of an inch up. And that notch is done. I'll go ahead and notch the other corner. Okay, what do you need to create a sheet metal transition? Well, you need these items here to start with, and these are contained in the Supply Plenum sheet metal transition kit. First off, we have the sheet metal itself. We have 4 of the sheet metal pieces. We have 8 of these S hooks or S drives, sheet metal screws, and sheet metal screwdriver. Now let's talk about what tools are needed. Okay, here are the tools that are needed to create a sheet metal transition. Here's a flathead screwdriver, hammer. These are sheet metal pliers. They have a flat head on them and they allow you to grab and bend sheet metal. Now you don't have to have these, but I'll talk about that in a second. These are sheet metal snips. You have to have a pair of these to be able to cut sheet metal. These are also sheet metal snips. You don't have to have these. I happen to have a nice pair of these, but if you have these, you don't need these. These cut a nice straight line, whereas these can cut circles too. So if you have these, that will allow you to cut straight lines and circles. You don't need these. This here is a flat sheet metal bender, and what it allows me to do is make 1-inch bends on the edges of a sheet metal. I put the sheet metal in here and bend it up. You don't have to have this if you have this. So keep in mind, not all these tools are necessary, but you will need something to make 90-degree bends with sheet metal, so either this or this. And lastly, I have a T-square for drawing straight edges. I don't necessarily have to have a T-square. Anything that's a straight edge, I can use. We're ready to make the transition. The transition is the part from here to here that's going to connect. Obviously, we can't have this big gap where the air is not going to flow from the air conditioning coil here up inside the plenum and then into the home. So we have to close this space here by creating our own sheet metal transition. We're ready to start doing that. Now, as you can see, we have an air conditioning coil on this furnace for central air conditioning. If you don't have central air conditioning, then you would begin to make your plenum transition right from the furnace itself, which begins right here. But in this case, we have a coil, so we're going to start from the top of the coil up to our existing plenum to create that plenum transition. Now, the first part is we take our S drives and we put an S drive all the way around the bottom. One on each side. Now we have enough S drives, 8 of them, to go all the way around the bottom, and then eventually we'll put one all the way around the top. But the first thing we do is measure the distance of each side, doing one side at a time, and then cut the S drive length with our sheet metal shears to be the same length, or maybe just 1/8 of an inch shorter than that. And then it's going to fit right on top of this little lip on the coil, and in the case of a furnace, there's a small lip as well that it would fit on top of. So, real simple, stage 1 is cut the S drives to the appropriate length, one for each side, and then go ahead and push it on. So we'll go ahead and cut those right now. Okay. I've cut the S drive so that it's the appropriate length, but the end of it is kind of smush, which will happen when you cut it with shears. So I'm going to take my screwdriver and I'm going to put it inside here and open it up a little bit so that it's not smushed shut. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the S on the lip on top of the coil here, and the way I do it is, if you'll notice, the end of the S drive is shaped like an S, you might say, or an N, but it's 2 V's. Now here's where the lip is on the top of the coil. I can put the drive on like such, and see how it fits on top of there. Or if I flip it the other way, like this. Now what's the difference? The difference is, the way I have it now, there's a V facing out to the outside, and that's the way I want to have it. So there's one V at the bottom, which connects directly onto the coil or the furnace or air handler, depends upon the piece of equipment you're attaching to. And then there's a V facing to the outside. That's the way I want it. The way I don't want it would be the opposite way, like we had before, which would be a V to the inside of the equipment, see? So that's just the way we don't want it. Here's the way we do want it. So I'll go ahead and just push it down on top of the coil, and it just holds itself in place. I'll go ahead and do that for all four sides on the bottom. We're ready to create the sheet metal transition sides. We create one side at a time using the sheet metal supplied in the supplies kit. Now we have 4 flat pieces of sheet metal. The sheet metal sizes that come with are larger than what you need, so you're going to trim them down. What size do you trim them to? Well, it's pretty easy. Let me show you how you do it. We do one at a time using the sheet metal and a marker. And here's what we do. Put the sheet metal in place for one side. Now I've gone ahead and I'm going to start with this back side here. So I put it in place, and now if I have it a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right, that's okay. I have it just resting on top of the coil, which is where we want it. And again, if we're installing a furnace or air handler, then it would rest on top of the furnace or air handler. I want to make sure that it's pretty much evenly spaced so the leftover portion hangs over either side. So I don't want it too much to the left or too much to the right, but I even it out. Okay, it's in place. Now what do? Now I'm going to use my marker and I'm going to mark the 4 corners. What 4 corners? Here's corner 1, 2, 3, and 4. I mark the location with the marker. Now there's 2 marks I make on every corner throughout this project, and that would be a horizontal mark and a vertical mark. Where a horizontal and a vertical meet, that's where a line is drawn or a cut is made. So a horizontal and a vertical line make a corner mark. I do that for each corner. And then mark the sheet metal so you know which side is up and down, so when we take it out, we don't get confused. I put an arrow showing down. So now I take the sheet metal piece, put it on the ground, and I'm going to make some marks on it that will allow me to cut it so it's the custom shape for fitting on that side. How do we do that? Well, first off, I have 4 marks in each corner. I'm going to go ahead and make those marks clear so I can see them where the horizontal and vertical lines meet. That's going to be the X mark. So I go ahead and make sure those are nice and clear. And I have 1 X for each corner. Now I draw a straight line between each X to create a box. So I draw the straight line for each side, 4 lines for 4 sides, by connecting the X's at each corner. There's my second side. Here's my top. And how do I know it's my top? Again, because I have an arrow here pointing down. So that's the bottom it's pointing towards. And then lastly, my 4th side. Alright, what we do next is we draw 2 more lines 1 inch out from our sides, 1/2 inch up from the top. So, let me go ahead and make that mark. 1 inch out on that side, 1 inch out on this side, the top 1/2 inch above that line, and then draw a straight line between it. So we can see we have a 1 inch line here, and that gives us a mark 1/2 inch up from the top. So we have 1 inch on each side and a 1/2 inch up on the top. And another 1 inch mark on this side. So we have our original box that we made, and then again a 1 inch mark made on the outsides for either side. Again, we know this is the top because the arrow is pointing down, showing this is the bottom. And we'll go ahead and leave the bottom line the way it is. Okay, it's time to cut it. We make our cuts on the outside lines. So that last line we just made, that's where we're going to cut. We'll turn the corner, cut on our outside line for the top. Again, cut on our outside line for this last side, and then we go all the way down to the bottom. We don't cut on the inside lines. So these other lines we made originally, we don't cut on those. We'll make some bends there later. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this piece out now. And that piece is done. Our last cuts are going to be notches that we make in each of the 4 corners. And if you look at the lines you've drawn, the notch is already drawn for you. We simply cut out that piece, that little square that remains in each corner. Have been notched out, and the last thing I have to do now is bend the 2 sides up 90 degrees. Now again, these are 1 inch strips I've made. I'm going to bend them up 90 degrees. How do I bend that? Well, I can use this flat bender. We do sell this on our website, and it simply slides on to the side, and then you bend it up, and a 90-degree bend has been made. Alternatively, you can use pliers such as these, which you can obtain at a hardware store, and simply do the same thing like that. I prefer to use this type of bender, so I'm going to do that here. Alright, we have our piece done. We have our sides bent, corners notched. We're ready to put it in place. So we go ahead and put it in place. Now what we do, we take the bottom and we put it in that S drive that we already put in place. We simply slide it down in there, like such. Have the piece in place in the bottom. Now I've cut my S drive for the top, and we can see that it's the appropriate length for the top. Now I'm going to slide the S drive on, and this is the interesting thing about this type of metal piece and how it holds pieces of metal together. Because of its shape, it will overlap the 2 pieces, and simply by sliding it on, it holds the 2 pieces in place. I'll go ahead and get a hammer and tap that into place. And it's in place, and this side is securely fastened and done. We'll repeat the same process now for the other 3 sides. Okay, now your first 2 sides, let's call this side 1 and side 2. If they're opposite of each other, which is the way to go, then side 3 and side 4 will also be opposite of each other. Side 3 and side 4. We've done side 3 already. We're on our last and final side, side 4. Let me show you how those go. They really work the same way, but there's a little tip or trick to make the marking of it easier when you already have the first 2 sides in place. Here's how it goes. Once it's in place, we'll use our marker to mark on the back side here a line using our other sides as an indicator where to mark that. So instead of just marking the top corners and drawing a line on the floor, we'll actually use the other side as a straight line to show us where the outside line goes. Here, I'll show you what I mean. put the piece on the floor to mark it, just as I normally would, but instead of having to draw a straight line between the two corners, my first line is already drawn. I used the sheet metal that was in place to make that line. Now I just have to measure 1 inch out, as I normally would, to draw my second line. Make my marks on all sides and cut this out just like the others. So we have our last side made, we're ready to put it in place. And we slide it down into the bottom S drive first. And all we have to do is put in our top S drive, and then this part's all done. And there you have it. Okay, we've got all 4 sides in place. We're pretty much done. All we're going to do now is we're going to tighten it up by putting some screws to secure each piece in place. We'll put screws on these 1 inch edges which bend over with our screw gun. Okay, now if you want to make it extra secure, now that we have all sides in place, we can go ahead and put a screw right through the S drives and hold the whole thing even tighter. Okay, that's it. We're all done. We've made our sheet metal transition here for this new furnace. Again, it works the same for an air handler or a furnace, whether it be horizontal or vertical or wherever it's installed. Now, if you want, you could put in the corners a little bit of silicone sealant, and that would tighten up some of the cracks in case the sheet metal didn't fit as tight as you would like. That's okay. A little bit of high temperature silicone sealant will work just fine there. Otherwise, we're all done. You know what? It looks great. Hopefully your installation turned out just as well. And we thank you for shopping at Alpine Home Air Products.